So welcome everyone. I'm excited to share kind of like as Peggy mentioned, some of the more basic techniques on seed collecting, seed cleaning, storage, and some of the characteristics that you're looking for when you want to do collection. Um, so without further ado, we'll go into here. So, why seed collection? Why is it so important? Well, there are many reasons why we do this. Some of the key factors that if you want to focus on, there's the whole restoration aspect. So we want to get seeds to restore ecosystems or improve our ecosystems, so then they can continue to flourish in our ever-changing world and start to really heal the landscape around us. Also big part of it is preserving plant populations, especially from local genetic sources. As we continue to see more development of, urbanization, especially in the Chicago area, more industrialized agriculture, a lot of these plant populations that have been hanging on for, you know, centuries or thousands of years as well, they're starting to disappear. And a lot of the local plant populations have some of the important genetics that are key for surviving a lot of the changes in our climate right now. They have more fine-tuned with the native pollinators as opposed to purchasing seed from other areas. And again, they're more adapted to the area, to our local climate than say like plants from further southeast or farther west. Um, so preserving those genetics is really important in order to keep these plant populations to continue to thrive in our in this changing world they're in. It's also more cost effective. If you collect your own seed, you're saving a lot of money. So, and you can see it from the sense of, sometimes a seed packet is like $3 a packet, it might have 300 seeds. So, if you wanted to, you can grow 300 plants for a very, fraction of the cost. And seed's very expensive as well, especially for wildflower mixes per acre. So, the more you can collect for your yard, or utilize the plants. So let's say you purchase at a plant sale to utilize more for your yard, the more you can save money on that. So tonight we're going to go over seed collection, cleaning, and storage. Some of the topics we're going to cover are seed properties and characteristics, timing as far as seed collection itself, drying, cleaning, and overall storage. So I like to always do a little bit of like a basic botany lesson to understand like what we're looking at with seeds and the fruits that, have are enveloping those seeds as well. So all seeds have a dormant embryo in them. If they don't have an embryo, they're not viable. So that dormant embryo, it's waiting for certain cues in the environment to initiate germination. And this has helped plants survive for, millions of years with this dormancy mechanism because they can survive extremely dry conditions, extreme weather conditions for a long time and still pass on, their species. All seeds are unique in their size, their seed coat thickness, development, fruit types, and etc. So there's a lot of great diversity in the seeds themselves. And if you ever get a chance, I challenge you to take time to really look at the seeds underneath like a hand lens or whatnot, really see the beauty and detail that each plant species has with their seeds. Um, Overall, there are two major types of seed classifications. There's what's called orthodox seed and recalcitrant seeds, and we'll go over what those definitions for each species. On the photo here, this is showing an example. This is a from some seeds that I purchased from a specialist with lilies. So, if I may confess, I do love native plants, but as a horticulturist, I am a plant collector, so I do like to get some unique non-native plants. So I apologize in advance. I have to have some fun stuff every now and then. So these are seeds that are called regal lily or Lilium regali. And this it really shows a great example of the embryo inside the seeds. It's kind of like that worm-like center there. And when you hold it up to a light with any lily seed in particular, because the lily seeds are so thin and have a thin seed coat, you can hold them up to a light and check if they're viable or not. So, from the vendor I purchased this from, looks like they gave me, my money's worth. So it looks like they had some good seeds, and I had actually good germination of them this year. So, just a really interesting photo showing like, embryos of seeds inside. So we're talking about orthodox seed. This is probably the most common seed that's out there. It is capable of completely drying out. It can survive both short and long-term storage. And most of our seeds, both native and non-native, fall into this category. So you think of, just your typical wildflower seeds, grass seeds, they fall into this orthodox seed. And this is really important because you can let them dry out and put them into long-term storage, whether it's like for your own use or for a seed library, or even like you think of like Chicago Botanic Garden, they have Millennium Seed Banks. These are seeds that can go into long-term storage in case, they want to preserve those genetics down the road. I'll also mention all the photos are mine. So if you want to, and I do have my hand out a lot of them. So if you want to critique if I'm a good hand model or not, feel free to do so. I might have another job opportunity with that. Who knows? So recalcitrant seeds are on the opposite spectrum. So they need a higher moisture content inside of what's called the endosperm, or like the starchy component of the seed. And they tend to and that they need that higher moisture content to stay viable and to survive. So because of that, they're incapable of long-term storage. And going back with orthodox seeds, they can have as much as maybe, 2 to 3, as well as 2 to 3% of the moisture content in that seed, so they can survive long-term storage. Recalcitrant seeds are sometimes called hydrophilic. They need a higher moisture content in them. And a lot of our spring wildflowers, our trees and shrubs and sedges, the grass-like plants that are native to our area, they fall into this category. And so I kind of like to categorize them by like, you have your berry producers. So, you think of like the fleshy fruits like cherries, Solomon seals, any of the seeds that have a fleshy fruit encoding them, they tend to be recalcitrant seeds. They often have an appendage called an elaiosome. And and I have a great example of the elaiosome in this photo. This is a photo of a bloodroot seed, if you're familiar with bloodroots or Sanguinaria canadensis. The elaiosome is actually a sugary, starchy component that the seed produces for a seed dispersal mechanism called Myrmecochory, which means it's dispersed by ants. So the ants are attracted to that elaiosome. It has a lot of nutrients and the goodies they're looking for. They'll drag it back to the colony, then they'll feast on that. And then ants usually have like landfills, quote, quote, in their colonies where they put all their trash or any dead ants or anything like that. And they don't eat the seed, so then they place that seed into their landfill. And what better place for a seed to germinate than in a bunch of ant poop and dead ants and all that good stuff that seeds are looking for. And it also protects them from the elements and whatnot. So it's a really cool, it's really fascinating how like, these plants co-evolve with insects, not for pollination, as well as pollination, but also for seed dispersal. And a lot of our spring woodland wildflowers fit into that category. And I usually try to lump the majority of the seeds that ripen before mid-July often fall into this recalcitrant seed category. We went over some of the different seed types. We'll go over fruit types. So we have the fleshy fruits, your berries. Those are, basic definition is a fleshy fruit that contains many seeds. A lot of our plants have those. There's also pomes, Those are fleshy fruits that have a tough central core surrounding the seeds. So classic example are apples and pears and other members of the rose family. There's drupes. Those are usually a fleshy fruit that has one seed or stone, often called that. So I think of your cherries, plums, they fall into that category. They have aggregate fruits, which are usually like, you know, many fruits clustered together. So going from left to right, we have drupes and the example of a choke cherry, Prunus virginiana. And then we have the aggregate fruits, which is a blackberry. This one is Allegheny blackberry, Rubus alleganensis. Then we have a classic berry, doll's eyes, Actea pachypoda. And then we have the pome, and this is a prairie crabapple or Iowa crabapple, which is Malus iowensis. And now we're gonna go into some dry fruits. So classic ones are capsules. Those are kind of the dry version of berries. So they're a dry fruit that contains many seeds. There's a follicle. Those are dry fruits that split open on one side. So the classic example is the milkweeds. Milkweed pods are a type of follicle because they only split open on that one side. There's saliques. Those are dry fruits that split open on two sides and have a central membrane. So a good example that are mustards. So you ever see like garlic mustard or Dame's Rocket? Their fruits are very narrow, but there's like a really thin wall in between where they open, and so that's a salique. So typical of the brassicas or mustards. Um, And then some more dry fruits. We have achenes. Those are a dry fruit with a really thin wall and one seed. This is classic for the composites or sunflower family. So a sunflower seed, the shell of a sunflower seed is actually the fruit. Um, or so that's a type of fruit, the achene there. Legume or a pod. So a pod is actually specific for members of the legume or pea family. That's a dry fruit that splits open on two sides. The fun name here is schizocarp. That's a dry fruit that splits, does not open the split the seed open. So this is a classic type of fruit in the carrot family. So often, and I got some photos of it, but you'll often see like if you're collecting golden Alexanders or yellow pimpernel, for example, they're often like, it's like a seed, two seeds on one little like floret. So and that's a schizocarp. And then there's a Caryopteris, that's a dry fruit with a very thin seed coat, and that's typical of the grass family. So like a wheat or corn, that is a type of Caryopsis. So going from left to right, I have a swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, and kind of showing where the follicle splits open on one side. And then I have a capsule. This is a blue flag iris, Iris virginiana shrebii. They remind me of Rolos, like how they're stacked in there and they're kind of the same color and all that. Um, and then this is not the greatest photo. This is from a prairie parsley, which is Polytinea nuttallii, showing the schizocarp type fruit on there. And then going again left to right, we have some prairie brome, Bromus culmii for the Caryopsis example with grasses. Classic sunflower head showing achenes, and then white wild indico, Baptisia lactea with the classic legume pod. So that just kind of shows the different types of fruit, and this is important when you're seed collecting to know, the characteristics of the fruit that the seeds are in, to know how to properly collect them, how to properly store them, and just treat them overall. So I'll go into a little bit of seed collection, and that's my hand holding Liatris spicata or Marsh blazing star. So there's different collection ethics out there. You want to make sure if you're collecting from wild populations, you make sure you have permission from the landowner agency. It is illegal to collect seed from the forest preserves or nature preserves or other protected areas. Um, but make sure if you do want to reach out, especially if you're like volunteering with a group, they're going to have different rules with that. Or if it's a private landowner, that's when you want to ask more with that too. And then if you are collecting from the wild, make sure that you're avoid collecting 100% of seed from a wild population. If it's your garden, it's different. You want to get all the seeds, no problem. But we want to make sure that the wild populations are sustainable, so we don't want to take all the seed from those. I would also, well, unless like it's an exception of like if it's an area is gonna be bulldozed down or under construction, but again, make sure you get permission from the landowner in that situation. So collection timing, it greatly varies, especially with different weather patterns and climate throughout the year. The years it usually varies. I use a fail-safe system in general, a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks after flowering to check on the seed. So usually after flowers get pollinated, it's safe to say that you want to, check about 6 to 8 weeks after after they're done flowering to just check on the status of the seeds. Some species are quicker than that, some are more prolonged. But you want to make sure like it's a good fail-safe system to start checking on your ripening seeds and fruit. And usually look for color changes, loosening of seeds and fruits. If they're still hanging on tights, it could be a sign that they're still ripening. Drying, texture changes, and even orientation. Um, so a couple examples of those. So like with the loosening or tight, a good example of this one is a plant. If you're familiar with it, hepatica or liverleaf. That's a spring woodland wildflower. The seeds are green when they're ripe, but if they're not ripe, they're still holding on tight to that flower head. But once you start to gently, rub your thumb against the seeds and they fall off easily, then it means that they're ripe. If you're looking for orientation, this is common for like violets. So for example, like your lawn violets, they will have their seed, nodding down, and then as they ripen, they will orient themselves upward and then it explodes, shooting the seeds. And you're trying to get your seed before it explodes and goes all over the place. So you want to make sure you look for characteristics and just to know, observe your plants, see what they're doing throughout the growing season for seed collection. Try to collect from multiple ripening dates. If you tend to collect from one ripening date, like then you're just gonna breed that plant into just for one harvest period. It's best to have early and late for the same species. It gives a variability again for a plant for those plants to survive different weather patterns and climatic conditions to know like it might be a good year to set early seed and have those genetics pass on, or it might be good better for the seed to be later and kind of vice versa. Again, like you're looking from a restoration standpoint, to have that variability, so then you can have adaptability for populations. Um, always, 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 and I'm speaking to myself, but always keep records of dates for ripe seed. You'll often forget sometimes. I am starting to get into that. It's not fun. But just keep track of dates, keep track of, I usually take pictures too of what seed looks like and look, from the dates there as well. But make sure you keep records of that so then you know to go back, in future years to know when to collect your seeds. Um, so there are some helpful seed ripening, what are called phenology charts, and phenology is just kind of like the time of the year that plants are flowering or going to seed. Matt Hokanson with Woods to Wetlands has produced a great document of seed phenology and collection times for plants in northeastern Illinois. I highly recommend checking it out on their website. It's under their resources page when you go there. Collection timing, continuing, you want to know the properties of the fruit and seed you're collecting as well, as I mentioned. So a classic example is explosive capsules. Again, you want to make sure that you're ahead of them, so then there's ripe seed before the capsule, ejects the seed, but you don't want to be there too early, so then your seed isn't ripe and therefore not viable. So what I have pictured here is the seed head of New Jersey tea or Ceanothus americanus. This one is an explosive capsule when it's ripe. They kind of look like toasted marshmallows when they're ripe. So that's what I kind of look for as I collect them. So they'll kind of have like that blackish color, but if they're still green, you don't want to collect them. And then if kind of like the actual capsule area, that like swollen part, the fruit, if it's gone, that means you're too late. So just, be mindful of that. The other thing you can do with the explosive pods is you can like put a bonnet or a bag over them. So then you can make sure like if you can't go back there for a while, you zip tie or like tie a bag or a mesh bag onto the seed so then it's not going to go anywhere. Paper or plastic? Which one is better? What are the pros and cons? I've had different opinions on the uses for these. Um, so paper bags are great in the sense that they keep seed dry, so there's less chances of mold. You really don't want moldy seed. It gets better, aeration and whatnot. Um, so I like to collect, I like to store seed in paper bags. The cons with paper bags is that you get those creases at the bottom, and then like they just every seed gets stuck in there, and you can never get anything out. Um, so and then with plastic bags, they work great for all seeds, especially like very, very tiny seeds, because that plastic's not gonna have that seed going or unless you have holes in them, but you got to make sure that there's no holes in your Ziploc bags. So, um, but you don't want to store seeds in Ziploc bags for a long time, especially if they're the orthodox seeds that need to dry out. Otherwise, they're going to get moldy. Um, so the plastic is good for collection, but you want to make sure that you dry your seed out. The other thing too to consider with plastic bags, especially if it's on a hot sunny day you're collecting, you'll get a literal greenhouse effect in with your seed inside a plastic bag. So it could be, warmer temperature in the bag than the outside temperature, and you don't want to cook your seed in there. So do be mindful, like if you're collecting on a hot sunny day, kind of keep the plastic bag shaded a bit. Seed drying, you want to make sure that your seed that is drying is in a well ventilated area. You want to avoid hot rooms and major temperature fluctuations. If you have really drastic hot and cold, and that's might kill your seed. So it's best to have it more of a stable place where it's getting enough airflow to dry, but not like really hot or really cold. It can really, it could kill your seed off. You want to dry in paper bags or on top of newspaper or have like mesh elevated screens with fine mesh if it's because you don't want your seed to fall through. So the orthodox seeds, the ones that can dry, they can be dry for a couple of months before you utilize them. Recalcitrant seeds, on the other hand, the like spring woodland wildflowers, the early ripening plants, um, I tend to usually let those dry for like 2 to 3 weeks at most, or even like a month at most. If you go over 4 weeks, you start to get viability decreasing in those seeds. Um, so you want to make sure that you want to dry them out just enough, um, but not like have them sitting in too much dampness or they could get moldy. Or in the case with like if it's pods or like the seed capsules themselves, then you don't want to get moldy capsules on your seeds. So it's kind of like getting enough time for them to dry out, but not too much. And then be mindful of where you're drying seed. Seeds often have lots of bugs. Seeds often smell funny when they're drying, or if they're molding, it's not good. Um, so just make sure it's in a room where you don't have a lot of people there. If it's at your own house, um, or it could be in your garage or whatnot, but just do be mindful of others when you're drying seed. So I have a couple examples here on the left. That is a drawer at CFC's seed room. Those are the stems of plantain leaf pussy toes or Antonaria plantaginifolia. They're on top of newspaper in a drawer, and that drawer has like a fine mesh screen for the bottom of it. So it's allowing the seed to get dry enough, and but the holes are still too small for the seed to fall through. But for fail-safe, Entenaria does have very tiny seeds, so that's why the newspaper is on there. And this plant also falls into our early ripening seeds. They are one of the first ones to ripen, usually end of like Memorial Days when I start collecting them. I've had much better success with growing them with sowing fresh seed onto trays versus um, waiting till they dry out and sowing in the fall. The only exception with that is like if I were to dry the seed out and to keep it in the fridge, then they can still have good viability, but we'll get into that a little bit later. The photo on the right is from the Chusa Grasslands. If you ever visit that place or hear that place, they have a phenomenal seed drying room. It's just a big pole barn full of seed. I absolutely love it. And the volunteers and stewards there, they did this like makeshift vacuum system that blows or sucks air it or either way. It's drying they put PVC pipe with holes in there and it's kind of like a vacuum to get air circulation into those bins so then they get even drying seed. If the seed is sitting in those bins for too long, then the stuff at the bottom gets moldy or overheats. So it's a really cool system that they developed there. If you want to do it at your own place, very cool. But if you have a pole barn or not, so and then use materials to help separate the seed from the chaff. I usually use sieves, wire mesh, or you can even make your own. If you're gonna use like a kitchen sieve, then like go to like the dollar store to have a used one because those sieves are gonna be really dirty and nasty, especially if you're cleaning like pulpy berries and whatnot. Make sure you pay attention with wire mesh and the gauges. They come in different sizes. There's like quarter inch mesh, eighth inch, eighth inch mesh. I can't talk tonight. 16th inch, 20th inch. So, um, and that's when you kind of look at the seeds that you have. Obviously, the really tiny seeds need the much finer mesh, the smaller ones, and then your larger seeds are going to need a bigger screen size. So, but most seeds fall into the category between 1/8 and 1/16. So if you want to build your own boxes or seed cleaning trays and screens, go with a more of like an eighth or a 16th. That's pretty commonly used for most of our native plant seeds. This one's on cleaning fleshy fruits. I have had I use this system. I will warn you, it gets pretty nasty, but it's good to mash and rinse the seeds that are in fleshy fruits under running water until that pulp is gone and separated from the seed. So a lot of fruits, these fleshy berries and all whatnot, they have chemicals surrounding the seed that inhibits the germination of seeds. The only way that they're broken down is if an animal ingests them and deposits them into a new area. Going through, I know, getting, the GI tract of an animal breaks down those chemicals. A lot of these plants I can't eat. The berries, they will kill me. And I don't really want to sift through anything that, for seeds too. So I don't want to use that method. So the other method to do to mimic that is fermentation. So what you do is you want to put let's say this example here is red baneberry, Actaea rubra. What you want to do is you want to mash the fruit up and put in like a bucket of water or a jar of water. Let it sit for a week. It'll get moldy. So if you want to, and have that, bad smell, so you want to cover it, go ahead. Um, Usually let it sit for 1 to 2 weeks, and then I will dump the seed over into a sieve and rinse it with running water, and that really cleans the seed, getting from nasty pulpy mess to some nice fine clean seed. And that clean seed germinates a lot better than if there was fruit around it. So fermentation is good for uh, berries like that. And the other thing with that process, do know that again, the properties of your fruit. So like Baneberry, Jack in the Pulpits, they have they're either toxic or in the case of Jack in the Pulpit, they have calcium oxalate crystals that can irritate your skin. So a lot of times when I clean fleshy fruits, I wear like latex gloves just for that. Needed extra protection, unless you know they're like wild grape or wild plum, then you know who cares type of thing. The other technique is what's called peel and smear. This is really good for berries with really tiny seeds that might go through, you know, the screens of sieves or mesh screens. Um, what you can do is you smear the fruit onto like a newspaper or a paper towel, let it dry for like a day or two, and then take the seeds off and then rinse them a little bit. A good example technique is either with like wild strawberry or elderberries because they have smaller seeds on their fleshy fruits. I'm going to talk about seed storage. Seed storage is great to extend the life, your shelf life of seeds. So storage is really important. In general, a cool, dry place is best for seed storage. And kind of like a equation that a lot of seed companies use is trying to add, you want the humidity, the percent of humidity, and the temperature to equal about 100% or 100 in general. So, for example, you can store seed in low humidity but warm temperatures, and they'll still have long shelf life. You think of like plants in like arid regions of the world, they find seeds of, you know, plants that, you know, are centuries old, but they're in those conditions because of the lower humidity and higher temperatures allows for good viability. On the flip side, if you have colder temperatures, you want to make sure you have a higher humidity. So a refrigerator is a great place to store seeds long term. And you want to use Ziploc bags, envelopes, or plastic containers for seed storage. Just so then for long-term seed storage, and you know you're not losing a ton of moisture out of them, and you're not spilling your seeds everywhere. And make sure that you label your seeds. Keep labeling your seeds, and if I haven't mentioned yet, you want to label your seeds. So, um, oftentimes I forget to label my seeds, and I see a bag like 2 months, 3 months later. I'm like, what is this? What did I collect? Um, so make sure that you label your seeds. There's different labeling systems. What I usually, my personal way of doing it is you look at the first three letters for like the botanical name. So like create an acronym. So let's say, for example, it's red baneberry, which is Actaea rubra. I usually go ACTRUB, or unless you want to write out the entire name of the plant. Make sure that you have the collection date and the date that you put it in storage. Um, and then, you know, any other, maybe like a site or a garden that you got it from. So, labeling is key to know, like, you know, when you cleaned it, when to put in storage, and the source. I like to put seeds in the refrigerator. It's a good option for long-term storage. Um, and then try to avoid storing seed at room temperature for a long time. Room temperature, if I forgot to mention earlier, so the embryo in the seed is dormant, but it's still alive, which means that it's still metabolizing, you know, water and nutrients. It's just at a much slower pace because it's dormant. And so if you keep seeds at a room temperature for too long, they're going to lose viability because you know, they're not in the conditions that they can go into long-term storage. I'll give you an example of this. So a few years ago, I found some swamp milkweed seed laying around at one of the CFC offices, probably a year old, sitting at room temperature. I wanted to test, you know, grow it to test to see, okay, is this still going to grow? I had very little to no germination on that lot of seed versus swamp milkweed that I stored in the fridge. So again, make sure that you have proper storage areas for your seed. And I don't know if I mentioned, but do label your seeds. So For recalcitrant seeds, it's a little bit more tricky, because again, like you don't want that moisture content to go away, to decline in the seed, but you don't want them to mold. So there's different ways to do this. Um, so if you wanted to store your recalcitrant seeds, your woodland wildflowers, for example, let them dry for a couple weeks, and then you can put them in a Ziploc bag in the fridge. You need to do that if you're not going to sow them right away. Um, so there's that option, or I like to store them in like damp sand or damp vermiculite. Vermiculite's an agent that they use, a substance that they use for aeration in potting mix. And I usually use vermiculite for larger seeds, and then clay sand for smaller seeds, in order to keep them viable. And with those, like you could keep them at room temperature just for like, think of like a growing season, so maybe 2 or 3 months, but you want to make sure you sow them uh after that to get their cold period. So last year I went to Prairie Moon Nursery. I highly recommend if you can do the tour there. It's a very fascinating place, even just like how they have a lot of sustainability for their buildings and being more eco-friendly as well with their operations. So going from left to right, so this is all the shells of all the bags of all the seed they process. They have a big seed room that's climate controlled, and like I mentioned, they keep it at like 65 degrees with about 35% humidity, and they told me that seed could last like quote forever in those conditions. Um, and then this is an example of their labeling system. So, like, again, they have the botanic name and common name of the species. So this is Zizia aptera, heartleaf golden alexanders from McHenry County, Illinois, and the date it was collected, which is August 2022. So if I haven't mentioned, you want to label your seeds to make sure that you'll keep track of everything. And then the last picture is a fridge. So they put all the recalcitrant seeds in there. So if you buy like meadowrue, if you buy bloodroot or bellwort from them, they store their seeds in the fridge, and then they will ship it, take it out of the fridge when they're shipping, and then they recommend put it in the fridge until you want to sow it. I would love a fridge like this one day, but you know, in time. So if stored properly, native plant seed can remain viable for a long time. So like I mentioned, if you do seed storage in the fridge, most forbs or wildflowers and sedges, they'll last around at least 7 to 10 years if stored in the fridge. Then that's at least, they even last longer if need be. And then grasses is up to 10 to 20 years. So again, if for example, I have seeds in my fridge at my own house or my apartment. I want a house one day. I want to make sure I can grow stuff so I can, when I purchase a house, I can just go crazy with the landscaping and grow my own stuff. So I have some stuff in the fridge, from like purchase stuff and whatnot. So, but if I have my time frame of like, the next couple of years, then that seed's still going to be viable. And it's all, but I always recommend, if you can, it is always best to sow the seed the year that you collect it. You're always going to get the best results if you sow your seeds the year of collection instead of holding on to them. Because again, yes, they can last long-term storage, but because of that dormancy mechanism in the seed itself, it's still metabolizing, so viability is dropping even though it's very slow. So that concludes the talk. If you're on Instagram, I have an Instagram account for Seed Tech Luke. So I have videos, pictures of native plant collection and propagation as well. And then there's my email address for Citizens for Conservation.